look toward building investment tracks for moving investment into ecosystems as a building block for green economy. So we're going to explore those two concepts of natural infrastructure and green economy and how to bring those things together. To help us do that, I'm going to introduce Andrew Deutz, who will give the introductory keynote, as well as he has taken on the task of moderating a discussion amongst panelists that will help us do that. Andrew is the Director of International Government Relations at the Nature Conservancy. So, Andrew.
Thank you, and good morning. I'm going to introduce our panel. I'll do it right now, and we'll go back to one by one. A few opening remarks. So, we're joined today by Dr. Valerie Hickey, who's a conservation biologist at the World Bank. She chairs the Biodiversity Community Practice and provides input on the vast natural resource management portfolio of the World Bank. Nina Marshall is the Managing Director of the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. Omer Bogdatan is the theme expert on land, water, and ecosystems for DGIS in the Netherlands in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Nick Davidson, probably known to everyone, is the Deputy Secretary General of RAMSAR. I'm going to come back with each one of them addressing presentations on 4 different elements of the larger question of what does it take to invest in natural infrastructure to make it part of the green economy. And I want to reflect for a moment on, well, if you will, remember those bad old days of October 2008? It was the moment in time at the heart of the financial crisis. The stock market was plummeting. The economic pundits were proposing that we were on the verge of economic Armageddon. Credit markets had frozen. Wall Street wasn't working. And there was a real crisis of confidence in global capitalism. We were also 1 year out from the Copenhagen Conference on climate change. And at that point, a year out, we were still optimistic that the world was actually going to get its act together and come to a global agreement to reduce gas emissions. But climate change was very front and center on the global discourse, and there was a widespread recognition that we needed to do something about the world's carbon emissions. And then there was this little minor issue off on the side that the General Assembly was debating a resolution to determine a theme for the Rio +20 conference. The General Assembly had agreed to an invitation from Brazil to host a conference, but they didn't have a theme. There was an intellectual vacuum in the UN about what the Rio conference should be about. And that's when this concept of the green economy really got going. I don't know who actually invented or coined the term. Achim Steiner from UNEP was probably its best salesman. So the Rio conference adopted the green economy as its theme, and nobody quite knew what it meant. But with all the energy and emphasis around the lead up to Copenhagen, most people had pretty clear indication that the green economy looked something like the low carbon economy. But that left a lot of us scratching our heads. Where's the green in the green economy? UNEP put out a report on the green economy that outlined 10 different sectors of the economy that were fundamental to a transformation towards a green economy. And it talked about the forest sector, it talked about the fisheries sector, it talked about agriculture. It talked about the importance of water, but it didn't really focus in on the concept of natural capital underpinning all of those other economic sectors. So we were at a moment of time where the world recognized that we had an economic crisis, and there was sort of a recognition that we had an ecological crisis, but all the political attention was on how do we fix the economic crisis. And this concept of green economy said, wait a minute, we need to fix both. We've actually come, I think, a long way in the last 3 or 4 years to understanding the importance of natural capital and infrastructure to the green economy. The conservation community actually deserves to give itself a pat on the back for a moment about our ability to successfully green the green economy concept and put natural capital at the heart of the discussion. It was deeply evident at the Rio conference this past year. There were elements of the negotiating text, but far more important, natural capital was one of the dominant themes in the discourse in all the parallel events, uniting the NGO community, the governments, and even a lot of businesses that are finally stepping up and recognizing the business case for investing in natural capital. It's a very clear dominant theme. put it in the water context, there was a significant transition in the discourse in the World Water Forum from Istanbul 3 years ago to this year in Marseille. 3 years ago in Istanbul, it was only those lunatic conservationists on the fringe, which I consider myself one, that were talking about green infrastructure and natural capital. And it was not a mainstream part of the discourse. The main discourse then was around the right to water and how we're going to meet the MDGs. And here were these conservationists saying, well, actually, we have some solutions to help you do that in a cost-effective way. We didn't get a whole lot of attention. This past year in Marseille, the concept of green economy, payment for ecosystem services, natural capital, were at the mainstream of the whole water discourse among water engineers, water ministers, and water policy leaders. We had succeeded in moving our issues from the fringe to the center of the debate in the water community. Whether it was about whole basin management, how to provide clean drinking water, how to deal with agricultural uses, or how to supply water to cities. So I think, we deserve a pat on the back for doing that. So over the last 3 years, I would say the world, when you talked about the green economy, and talked about natural infrastructure 3 or 4 years ago, people said, what is it? Now we've answered that question. And then the next question that came up was, well, why would you do it? And I wouldn't say we have authoritatively answered it, but we've got some pretty good indications of why you would do it. We know that protecting upper watersheds can provide clean drinking water and remove sedimentation cheaper than built infrastructure. We know that mangroves can provide coastal protection. We have a whole range of examples. We still have a lot more work to do to systematize that work, but we have a really good argument that is now intuitively understood by the mainstream communities out there why you do it. Now we're getting the harder question. It's the question of Rio, and it's the question we're going to address today, which is, okay, green infrastructure, natural capital, we get it, how do you do it? So I'm going to turn over then to our panelists, and we're going to address 4 different questions throughout the morning here on how you do that. So the first discussion is going to be by Nick on how to do valuation for natural infrastructure. The second one from Nina on piloting mechanisms. The third one from Valerie on scaling up strategies. And the fourth one from Amaya on the policy processes to make this work. Each of them is going to give about a 5 to 7 minute presentation, and then we're going to break up into roundtable discussions to involve all of you in the audience and help you think through how we do those 4 things to significantly scale up successful investment strategies in natural infrastructure. And then we'll come back for some feedback from the breakout groups, a little bit of interaction from the panel, and summarize. That'll be the run of the show for the morning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick. I think he's got a couple of slides up first. And if you want to stay down there, I'm going to come sit down. Or you can come up here, whatever is easier. All right. So then our first speaker is Nick Davidson on natural infrastructure valuations.
Good morning, everybody. I promised myself that this might be the first conference at which I managed to avoid having to prepare any PowerPoint presentation. I failed. But I also did see up on that other slide, it said Nick Davidson valuation. So I'm looking at the discussion breakouts to have a value placed on me as well as on our natural infrastructure. I'm going to be very brief. I hope so anyway. We know that as a world, we are happily continuing to destroy our natural infrastructure, our ecosystems, which is a complete paradox because we depend on those for our future livelihoods. How do we close the gap between those 2 things? The demand for economic growth at all costs, lack of understanding in the decision-making community in different sectors of the huge value we get from our ecosystems, services, the benefits they provide to everybody, often effectively for free, but then taken on in terms of businesses where you are an energy producer or a food producer or whoever. And somehow we've got to try and get a better message across, and notwithstanding the value which I said about the success of getting natural capital, natural infrastructure, green economies, the centre of attention much more. I think the conservation community has failed in actually understanding how to get our understanding across to those who actually need to know more about it, the policymakers, the presidents and the prime ministers who are dictating growth at all costs, which may be, as in some parts of the world, including this part of the world, destroying the hand that feeds us. So, we need to get a better understanding of the value, and not just the monetary values, but the non-monetary values of the systems that we depend on. There's a lot of information out there, but it's scattered, as always. And I don't think we've been very good at bringing it together into forms in which we can get it into the hands of decision makers. So this is where I think the team, the Economics of Systems of Biodiversity initiative, comes in helping to get those messages clearly compiled and out. And in relation to water and wetlands, which is the core of my business, we are currently preparing a key report on the economics and ecosystems of water and wetlands, particularly focusing on the water-related services, because water is at the core of everybody's life and everybody's business. And it's the wetland systems which manage our water for us and make sure that the global water cycle, despite the disruptions we make to it, can continue to deliver water, hopefully, roughly where and when we need it, in the right quantity and the right quality. This is work that's in rapid progress. We commissioned it earlier this year, and we're extremely grateful to the governments of Norway, Switzerland, and Finland, and ICO, the water programme, for finding the resources to actually make this happen. Hot off the press, there's a review draft going out for peer review actually yesterday night, and we're aiming to launch the findings of the report at the CDD COP11 next month in Hyderabad. We know we're continuing to destroy the systems. We are losing wetlands, and therefore we are losing the services and the value of the services that those systems used to provide us with. And Ramsar has, if you like, a triage approach to addressing this issue. At the core of the convention text is to stem the loss and degradation of wetlands. So in other words, avoid wetland loss. If you can't avoid wetland loss, mitigate for it, minimize the impact of that loss. And if you can't fully mitigate, then compensate for those losses often in other sites to try and enhance them. And restoration is a tool which I'll come on to in a moment, as a response to help redress the damage that we've already managed to cause to our system. There's been, not just in terms of carbon services, much attention on forests, much less attention on coastal and inland wetlands, but we're beginning to see the stories emerging. There's more and more attention to restoration, for example, of mangrove systems, because they are huge carbon sequesters and storers, as are increasingly clearly other types of wetlands, so it's not just forests. And here's a figure out of the team work, which will also be included in the synthesis report, which gives you some sense that we maybe have been focusing our attention on the wrong ecosystems in terms of the value they deliver to us. It may be hard to see on the great images, but from the top, we've got oceans, woodlands, grasslands, temperate forests, rivers and lakes, tropical forests, and then inland and coastal wetlands. The scale along the bottom is a logarithmic scale, so these are orders of magnitude difference in terms of the values that these different types of systems deliver. And I've highlighted with these rather vague green boxes the wetlands. I think the message is remarkably clear, but it's not one that I've heard out there being discussed and debated, is that we really need to focus on the different types of coastal and inland wetlands, because that's where the huge values are of services, benefits we get from the system. Now, keep in mind that sort of sequence of coral reefs right down at the bottom, coastal wetlands, and inland systems. I've just said that the approach we should be taking is to maintain those systems at all costs, because of what they deliver to us and how much we depend on them. But we've destroyed or degraded vast areas of them. So we have to turn to looking at restoring them. Unfortunately, this figure we haven't reorganised it yet, but we sorted out in the final report. It's another key figure on the costs of restoring degraded systems. And again, the vague boxes are wetlands. Inland wetland over on the left-hand side of that central box, and coastal wetlands up here. And there's a kind of positive relationship, it's not a very positive, it's slightly depressing one, between the value of the systems, what the value of the systems deliver to us, but also the costs it takes to actually put them back again when we're foolish enough to destroy them. And so we need to look more at these sort of trade-offs and make this sort of information clear, that you get huge value out of the systems as they function in a natural and intact way. If you do damage or destroy them, the investment cost to put them back again, to regain those services, is very big indeed. And again, this is a long scale, orders of magnitude. And coral reefs, right-hand side, for example, huge value, but very, very high cost, very difficult, lengthy process to restore them. So we need to look more at these balances between the values of what we get from the systems now and what it means we have to do if we messed up and have to actually try and put them back again to maintain our water infrastructure or whatever. So I'll stop at that point just as a starting point for thinking when we break out into discussions, and watch this space for much more in the Water and Wetlands report from T that will be launched later this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. That was an excellent teaser for the T report. Next up, Nina Marshall. Tyler, you got this.
Thank you very much. I'm going to tell you a little bit about CPF, and then I'm going to give you 6 examples of what our grantees are doing to pilot evaluation of national capital. To start off, the Critical Ecosystem Partnership was created in 2000 when our founding members, Conservation International, the World Bank, and the GEF, recognized that to conserve the world's most threatened and important areas, that a mechanism was needed to ensure that civil society,